Hello and welcome to the Rising Sovereign podcast. I'm Jay Azavari.
And I'm Jaydee Azavari. And today we're going to talk about 3 homeschooling myths. Jump right into the homeschooling aspect of the Rising Sovereign podcast.
Right.
Right. The first one is reading and writing. Will my child learn these skills? Per quota of the society at large.
When will they learn to read?
Will they and will they? Will they, though? It's also will they. The second will be socialization, and will my child have friends is basically the question with that one.
Will they be normal?
Will they be normal?
Socially normal.
Socially normal. And then will they graduate, or are they going to be ready for the real world?
Will they be ready for the real world?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So you were just sharing with me some interesting things about reading. All of our children have been homeschooled. 3 of them have graduated as homeschool students. So all of them have had to learn to read in some out-of-the-box type of way. Depending on the kid, it was different each time, but it shows up. And it shows up with a lot of the families who have younger children who are considering homeschool or have been a part of AUTA or a part of other groups that we were into. They're like, well, how's my kid going to learn to read? When should I do this? How do I do that? Society says, start them as young as you can, which clearly, for example, the Waldorf perspective is contrary to that. And we've kind of found ourselves in the middle along the way.
Right. And we've had a variety of different timelines that have expressed themselves with different kids.
That's what I mean.
Some kids have learned pretty effortlessly on their own, and some have waited a little longer, and we've used other methods to help them along the way.
Yeah. But you were just talking about an interesting perspective that I hadn't heard in this way before.
Sure. Well, I'm a big fan of Greg Carlwood and the Higher Side Chats podcast, and he had a recent interview with a guy named Chris Knowles, and they were talking about technology and its history with humanity, and going back many, many years before
technology. Well, the question was, what's the first technology? And we can define technology right now as computers and iPads and phones and all those things. And then it was like, well, is it agriculture?
He asked Chris if it was agriculture. Chris thought about it for a minute, and then he came back and said, well, no, I think it's reading and writing, and language and writing. And so he used a quote from another guy, and he said that spelling is spellcraft and grammar is grimoire, which is a book of spells, and that language and writing allowed people to then recreate reality in their own image.
Wow.
And
super interesting.
So from the perspective of thinking of reading and writing as a technology, as with any technology, there needs to be a certain amount of maturity that would come along with being able to wield this technology. That's why things like smartphones and kids and screens and all of these things have concerns, and we don't really ultimately know what the long-term effect is going to be. So a child that's 3 and forced into a situation where they're being expected to be reading and writing.
And using very cognitive type brain functions.
Right, because you're abstracting meaning from symbols and then creating and then attaching meaning to that, and then being able to use that in a way, and is a 3-year-old ready to do that? Some of them probably aren't. Maybe some are.
And even if they are, is it appropriate?
Is it appropriate? And what are the repercussions?
So in the perspective of Rudolf Steiner, reading starts around the age of 7, and that has to do with the brain being developed enough to handle that type of cognitive function in relation to the abstract qualities that it brings about. So it's given the child, the developing human, 7 years, a 7-year cycle to build what would appropriately be needed underneath the language to have it work correctly, or have it work with the best intentions even for that individual and for who they're communicating with, and then the rest of their lives.
Right.
So at the age of 7, you've spent a lot of more time socializing as the driving force. You've been working with your emotions. You've been working with interaction and community building, and the development of all the other aspects that come along with being human, that aren't just like this very almost clinical way of existing that comes about through reading and writing.
Right. I can think of it as the imaginal realm, and the way that meaning is interpreted with imagination and imagery and fantasy and all of the things that would come into, play in a child's early life. And then by contrast, taking all of that meaning and focusing it very, very sharply into a specific symbol that is supposed to have a specific meaning. And the hard edges and the rigidity of that in contrast to the world of the imagination, and trying to do that too quickly. That
before
seems
the
like
hemispheres of the brain even can bring that together in the way that they were designed to.
Right. And so you bring in this other aspect that we were talking about with spelling and spellcraft and grimoire and a book of spells, and how we, use vibration and cognitive and all of that with our breath to focus things into a narrow beam of meaning. And so there comes into play this wielding of technology. I mean, it's like we are speaking things into existence within our own view of reality in this way. And so, you're handing this this tool over to maybe a 3-year-old in this way that are they, and are we as a culture really factoring in all of the things that would go along with that.
And behind that, why? Why are we doing that at a certain age? Why has our expectations as a culture been designed to do that at these different points? And we definitely, oscillate between how programming is helpful or how an institution is looking out for our benefit versus not. And there's a lot of questions around that too. Like, if you are doing things to dismantle the natural process of human development, what is the sequela, and what might that be looking to produce? If you get into things like John Clychek and Charlotte Iserby, there's a lot behind why reading and that type of thinking is pushed at such an early age. We don't need to necessarily talk about all that right now, but getting back to how we want to hold this, between the two of us and between people who are listening here, in relation to truly empowering our children as they grow, and what is the outcome that we're looking for, because we aren't able to truly predict, shape, create a certain outcome. We can only be present for the process.
Right. And it makes me think, if something is forced in a way that's potentially damaging or disruptive, would you want your child to be able to read and write at the expense of being able to think? I mean, so it's like there's these things, and it's not to say that there's one right answer and we have the right formula, but I think
saying right, and then we're talking about writing.
RIGHT versus WR. Anyway, the point is to question the expectation that it's, has to happen this one way.
And so for me, however, I became who I am on the planet, I wasn't concerned with reading with my children. It didn't really offer a subject that I was like, oh, they might not do that. It was as natural to me to think about them walking as it was with talking, as it was with then learning and reading and writing. Like, they would do it because it's part of our way of existing with one another, that you're just going to do it because it's in your environment. And they all did.
Right.
And however, though, it was quite different between my first and second. And so I had that framework that I just described upheld for my firstborn, and it worked seamlessly. He started to read, and I don't really even know how. It just happened, right? And then my second son, that wasn't the case. And I almost I overlooked it potentially, I guess, from the perspective of the Waldorf school that he was in at the time. They came to me and they were like, whoa. We just figured out that Zaya isn't reading and he needs to be. And I was kind of like, what? Okay. So he started getting more attention and time around reading. I did get him tested. He was labeled pretty severely dyslexic.
Right.
I spent many afternoons then for many years driving back and forth between our house and we're in Gillingham tutoring and lots of supplemental things for him. But at this point, he was 8. Like it wasn't until 7 and 8 where we realized, or quote unquote, realized this thing about how his brain worked and brought it into his world. I can't imagine doing that at a younger age if he would have been in a different educational system that identified this, that labeled this, because his brain is so different than my oldest. It's incredibly unique. It's very abstract. He was the kid who could fix the vacuum cleaner when no one else in the house could at the age of 6. Like, right. It's like, what'd you do, Zai? You fixed the vacuum cleaner. So how much of that part of his ability or development could have been shifted or thwarted in a negative way had we brought in this like intense cognitive type education at an earlier age? And right. I still wonder if it was the best thing, because he still doesn't really have the reading skills that any of the other children do, but he's incredibly artistic and
well, he's one of the deeper thinkers.
Deep thinker. That's what I was looking for. Yeah.
He can conceptually ask questions that are well beyond his years. Yeah. And so, like you said, had that been something that he'd been entangled and ensnared in this needing to learn how to read from the age of 3, who knows what that would have resulted in for his well-being. Yeah. And so, yeah, there's all different options out there. And really, most importantly, it's just checking in with your child.
Well, and really, like the motivation. Is the motivation for your child learning to read coming from something inside of yourself as a parent that's like a pressure from society, from a grandparent, from an experience you had yourself as a young child? Where is that true origin point? And then what are you doing with that in relation to that child that you're now fostering?
So anything else about that topic?
Well, I think each one of our kids then from there, Cedar, the next child I had, read without any issue at all. Again, I don't even really know how he learned. He just did. You had a similar experience with Payla. Fina tended to be a bit more, tends even still to be a bit more like Saya. She's an incredible artist. She is a very deep thinker. She is abstract. She didn't learn to read as quickly as the other children. She was still at early readers when other kids might have been into chapter books. However, now where she's at, there's no issue.
Well, and interestingly, with both Fina and Zaya, their cursive writing is gorgeous.
Beautiful.
And so there's something that with the tapping into the artistic quality of language that really worked for them. Yeah. And then Jaro, our 7-year-old, he's kind of just taken the reins, and he's motivated. He wants to learn how to read.
And a lot of people do say that. Well, they're like, well, my child wants to read, so I'm going to help them along maybe at an earlier age. And just because a child is asking for something doesn't necessarily mean it's what they want or it's what's best for them. And I think we can compare that to eating ice cream for all 3 meals of the day. Just because they want ice cream for breakfast doesn't mean that's what's best for them.
Well, our 7-year-old also asks for a smartphone.
Yeah.
And we're not going to give him one.
Right. And so I do think that is a caveat that I hear a lot of parents say, well, they're like, oh, well, they're wanting to learn, so I'm going to give it to them maybe at the age of 4, for example. But it doesn't mean that they're actually ready to read. Because my experience with children at the younger than 7 who are asking, they may sit to hear you talk about reading for a minute, maybe 3, maybe 5, but they're truly not looking to learn to read. They're just starting to discover the world around them and wanting to understand it more. And they see this thing that others are referencing to, especially adults, which draws in their curiosity. It doesn't mean that they're actually ready to learn to read, and that we take that as a cue to then start bringing home early readers.
Right.
And if you look into like the structural aspects of the hand or the eyes, that's also something to consider. There is a connection between needing glasses and learning to read too soon because of the musculature in the eyes, or the hands being developed enough to actually hold a type of like a pencil or a writing utensil that's thin that actually creates a letter versus a more broad drawing. And
like
you've done a lot
sidewalk chalk or a block crayon or something
that's form drawing and things like that as a precursor to actually writing with a pen or a pencil.
Well, it is a good point, because the kind of like the primordial world of form it needs to be handled with some intention as far as how quickly that can coalesce then into something that's like narrow and doesn't allow for fluidity in the same way, to echo what you were just saying.
So taking it back to authenticity, sovereignty, where is the drive and the motivation for the things we do as parents coming from? And then from there, is it really, where's the alignment with ourselves and our child? And each child can be different.
Yeah. And reading and writing is a really great example of that, because it is so often held as a thing that we have to get this done.
Yeah.
You have to figure it out by the time they're 4 or 5.
Yeah. And that's really not the case. It's not.
No. Okay.
So from there, let's get into socialization. So I was thinking about this and had an interesting reflection that children who are younger, it's often the parents who are worried about them having friends and being socialized. But then when they get to middle school age, teenagehood, the parents are a little bit like, I don't know how to do this. And the kids get worried about having friends and how's, my life going to look if I'm so quote unquote isolated as a homeschool, student child. And again, for us, this goes back to each child being so different.
Right.
And the kids who I would put under the category of being an extrovert always have had friends around them. I don't know where they even came from some of the times, even at how old is Payla? And she would be walking through the park and she'd have a friend on each arm and be like,
where did you meet these kids?
And
Cedar the same way.
We
were at the 4th of July.
And all of a sudden he has a new family behind us that he was with the entire time.
Right.
Versus, again, like Zaya, for example, the second oldest, is a quiet person. And he's always only had a few folks around him. And he's very happy with that.
Right.
And the oldest is selective. He's had friends when he wants them. And when he doesn't have them. And that's kind of how he moves through everything.
Right.
So I think that especially in our current times with parents having so many more avenues to connect with other homeschooling parents, to ask questions, to say, hey, do you have a 6-year-old in this location that we could hang out with? There are very few reasons to feel concerned about your child's socialization. And if you get back to where is your parenting coming from, I would say psychologically, like there are different theories around attachment or different theories within even the context of Christianity and how we're forming our attachments. And then from there, how we communicate, how we bring ourselves together with other humans, first within the context of our family. That's the foundation for being social in the world. And how can we really look at creating those frameworks within sibling dynamics and parent to child dynamics to focus on socialization when a child is still growing versus when they leave home and they're out in the world.
Right. And there's this piece about outsourcing. And that could apply to the first topic as well, where it's like, where is the impetus or the decision coming from for what the requirements are around this thing? But if we take that into the socialization piece, you look at public school and it's very, very difficult to figure out like who's in charge.
Yeah.
Really, it's like kind of a mob mentality of kid culture that's coming from like nowadays, it's coming from like technology and social media.
Which we aren't really going to get into social media, technology, those influences on socialization within the context of this episode. We're going to do a whole series on that in the near future.
Right. So just to
interject that momentarily.
But I think about my experiences going through public school, and it was like, the teachers were there. the administration was there, the school faculty was there, but really the deciding factor as far as what the main influences were among me and my peers was the rest of the kids.
Yeah.
And so then you have to contend with a variety of different influences, and it does kind of further create a situation where what is your child going to be following is like some sort of guidance or guidepost, or what is the guiding force?
And what is, again, the point for socialization? Is it to develop social skills? Is it to foster a sense of community that they're going to take for the rest of their lives? Because we are in a very different societal way of living and structure than we used to be, for example. So even the idea of, in a public school system, a child's only around people within a very narrow age range. And people, we talk about that as, well, you're never like that in any other time in your life. So is that normal? What's that doing?
Right.
And from there, like, how much is the peers of that group influencing what they're doing? And are you choosing those peers or not?
Right. And having, it's so easy for that to happen where the relationships between peers, but then also like families, and like there's any possibility that could arise. And does that resonate with your family's values? Or what is the, I don't want to say vetting process, but like some of that, depending on the age that the kid is at, is going to be more important. And, depending on the family, I mean, I don't know, we need to redo some of that, but like what I just said.
We'll try it again.
Okay. So coming back into the culture and the like ethical or moral framework that would be contained within many of the school settings, the public school settings, like for my experience, there was much of that peer-oriented dictation of like how things went and what was acceptable, what you were supposed to do, how you were supposed to act, how you were supposed to conduct yourself. And that was really just being steered by kind of a random selection of whatever kids happen to have the most charisma and sway over the rest of the kids. And then tying that into like whatever their family's values that were instilled in these kids, and then how that would affect all the other kids. And so it sort of really sets the stage for what you're going to be, how you're going to be influenced, or how your child will be influenced.
And how much of a choice or say you have over all of those influences if your child is in a more public or even larger private school setting versus being homeschooled.
Exactly.
So people often bring up the fact that if a child's in a regimented school program, they're often only around kids within a very small window of age, and how that's not, how we live in any other time in our lives. And there's pros to that in relation to what you were just talking about in regards to influence. When you don't know, for example, the history or the backstory of a family, if there's an older child around a younger child. But if you do, if you're in a setting where I've found homeschooling facilitates or fosters, the parents. Right. So you're going to have a sense of if this older child is going to be like a positive influence on a younger one. And really, that's a beautiful dynamic if they are going to be a positive influence. So you get more opportunity and more of the chance to shape the socializing that your children will receive if they're homeschooled, at least in my perspective, and after raising kids for the last 2 decades in this way.
Right. There does seem to be a quality versus quantity aspect.
Yes, and that was something that I would always tell the kids, because they'd bump up against this, especially like I said a minute ago, when they started to get teens, they'd come to us and be like, I don't have friends, I'm weird. They all did it. That's normal. That's a normal thing. But then I was like, well, it's also normal in high school, public high school, to feel that way. I felt that way. Just because you're in a setting that has a bunch of people around you doesn't mean you're going to have a bunch of friends, doesn't mean this is going to be easy. I feel like it might even have been or be harder.
Yeah, I mean, I had in high school, I had like a crew of maybe like 8 to 10 kids that were like sort of tight. But we ended up being, at least from my perspective, we ended up banding together kind of in opposition to a lot of the mainstream culture within the school. Yeah. So it was sort of like this, we were rebelling against the inner culture of the school in a lot of ways. And then,
and very much like even the reading and writing piece, are we putting children into an environment that they're truly ready to handle? Like when you were saying that, that's what started to come to mind for me. And also my own experience of high school, where I did feel very alone, didn't feel like I had a lot of friends, didn't feel like I fit in. Countered that by being a cheerleader and the president of the school. But ultimately underneath it, I felt very lonely. And I don't feel from that experience that I had a good like structure of community around me. And it's weird because it also was a small town. So some of the people I graduated with, I'd been in school with since kindergarten. So it's like, where is that misstep coming from? You know? And I do think that questions like that really pushed me into doing things different for my own children. And for example, with homeschooling. And
well, I think you could look at some of that, what you just described, as what are the guiding principles of what you're supposed to be doing as a high school student.
Right.
You're supposed to get good grades. You're supposed to be, a sports star or a cheerleader or the president of your class, but to what end, to what means? And not everybody is going to be able to excel at those things. And like, for instance, you had some of these experiences, but it wasn't gratifying or fulfilling on another level. No. So,
yeah. So overall, being concerned about your children socializing really has nothing to do with what kind of school setting they're in. If you have a child in a public school situation, in a private school situation, there's going to be socialization issues. Whether too many friends, not enough friends, friends that make you cry, friends that make you mad, it's always going to be there. And what it comes down to is how much control, for lack of a better word, or how much, ability do you have to shape who's going to be within their realm of socializing, and then also like how's it going to be managed?
Right. And the values the
values have to do with who the people are, that your kids are socializing with.
But the value within the family is what I'm talking about. Like that's kind of like the basis, the foundation for socialization. And, we want to make a distinction between being a social person or having social skills and then like social programming, because that's like,
oh my goodness.
But that's like what you're casting to chance this, what you're going to be contending with in public school or, any larger social context.
Yeah.
So there needs to be an emphasis and a responsibility for the values within one's own family and having those conversations with each other, with your kids, and really being strong and clear and loving about all of that. So that was my other piece that I thought of as we were talking about this.
Great. Thank you. And that does lead into, as we kind of move through the ages here, the last myth that we're going to cover, which is, will my child graduate from high school? Will they be able to go to college? And then will they have a successful life? And taking it right back home again, guys. Oldest, completely graduated from college, all on his own. It's what he wanted to do. Computer science, master's degree, all the way. Second child did not do that. Works for a landscaping company and absolutely loves it and is very content and happy and fulfilled through that process. Yes. Next child went to early college through the local community college, chose to do a trade because he was interested in it, but also from his own words is, so I'll have something that I can, use to earn money from while I figure out what else I want to do. So I'll have a valuable skill. Went through the automotive department and has graduated with whatever certificates or degrees you get through the community college, automotive program.
Knows a whole lot more about cars and vehicles than he did before.
Yes,
and works for a
mechanic and changes the oil for our entire family for free, and feels as if, you know, it isn't exactly what he wants to do, but he was able, through his own, again, choices, being able to navigate the world, see a bigger picture, decide what works now that can help me out later.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And so I do think that continuing with each of these topics to really get to the place of where's the motivation coming from? Why am I worried about this for my child? Does it have to do with something that's like specific to this kid, that's developmentally or, you know, systematically that they might need extra help with? Or is it coming from outside of me, from a pressure? And then if that's the case, look at the pressure, look at that, not the kid.
Right. Well, and to go to the next chronological kid, Pela, we looked at the option of her doing early college versus staying in a more structured program. And we realized that she needs a lot more structure. I feel like it would be a misstep to have her try and figure too much out at this next phase.
And so we're considering different programs that might offer her more structure than maybe any of the other kids at the age of 16. Because again, that's what we feel will best support her and her individual needs. Whereas then the next one in line, I don't know if she'll ever go to like a regular, more consistent program than a couple days a week with art classes. And she's super into Muay Thai, so she does that 4 days a week.
And she's pretty industrious, left to her own devices.
She likes to create and do things within her like own sphere, more so than, for example, Pela, whose desires are very much, you know, looking outward in the world and interacting in the world rather than within her own like.
Right. And I overheard a conversation. Well, it was in the car, so we were all talking, and we had picked up Pela from somewhere, and then she was going to do something else with a bunch of friends. And it was, you know, getting on in the day. It was like evening time. And Fina said, well, how is your social battery going to be able to last through this next event? And, you know, Pela was like, well, this actually will recharge my social battery, being around a bunch of people. But for Fina, it was seemingly like a daunting task. Like it would be tiring for her. It would be exhausting. So that difference in introversion versus extroversion.
Right. And so as far as how they will succeed in the world, it's always to be determined. But if we can be present to each child along the way and shape their, you know, formative years as much as we can uniquely to them and their own needs, it's possible. It really is. And thinking that you have to make choices that will get you then potentially like stuck in a system or a routine, it's also always possible to step out of that and choose something else. There are resources, there are people, including ourselves, who can help support somebody if they feel like it's time to make a change. Don't let that stop you.
Yeah, and we've changed course mid-semester several times.
Yeah, we always joke if people ask, what do your kids do? It's like, well, which year is it and which kid are we talking about?
Which month of which year and which kid? Yeah, so there's been a number of occasions where upon just some reflection and assessing where things are at, we've needed to make a change. And it was, you know, sometimes it was awkward and uncomfortable and had to have meetings with administration and principals and things like that, but we navigated through it. And it was being led by listening to the needs of our family, the values of our family, and the needs of our child.
And that just did remind me. So when COVID hit, we did have 2 of our kids in a local private school. They hadn't been in school for a while, but they really wanted to give it a try. So we had an 8th grader and 9th grader. And the school went very much with all the mandates, all the regulations, and that didn't work for us, as you clearly all know. So we decided that they weren't going to go to that program anymore. And they were so upset and so angry. And I also saw kind of like the flip side of being in a program like that offers so much repetition with the same people over and over in the same, like they couldn't break out of it. And yes, there is a lovely quality. Like, for example, when we just went to California and saw your friends from many years ago of sustained relationships that can be created in our younger years. But what is like the unhealthy attachments that could happen? Because it was like they couldn't break free of these people. And once they did, because we didn't let them go back, they had some reflections around that.
Sure. Well, and even with my experience of going to California and seeing some of my friends from high school, it was a pretty large group of people that I grew up with. And there was some dysfunction and old stuff
that was like still showing up.
Kind of almost like family dynamics that, right? I hadn't seen these people in like 20
But without, again, like without the values of what a family structure really holds and needs, like at that attachment level versus doing it with people that maybe there aren't the skills there or aren't the same values, and then how that can wrap us up for so many years. I mean, I truly still have challenges with with memories of things that happened. And as the years go by, those challenges and memories haven't really changed that much unless I focus to do work on it, right? But it's almost like there was no time that's passed, like how much the influence of certain circumstances or situations that occurred at that time in my life that didn't have the proper support, that didn't have like a true community to hold me. And we talk a lot about like how much of the adult life is healing and unraveling from our childhood. And that's not just parental, like that can come from social very much. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's like an incomplete attempt to unravel a trauma within the psyche of somebody. And then, you end up kind of recreating that situation. I mean, if you look into the ideas of like family constellation or internal family systems and how those things are able to be recreated based on the blueprint you hold within you amongst a group of strangers, and things will come up that will recreate patterns that you're holding
not just in the family of origin, for sure. And that's an interesting topic that we do get into with our Josh McLaughlin interview, really looking at like where we are as a society in regards to our capacity to hold community versus one-to-one relationships. It's really good stuff. I encourage you to listen to that one. But, bringing it back to, will my child graduate from high school? The answer is yes, if you want them to, regardless of what school they go to. So those 3 kids that I spoke about earlier, they all received a homeschool high school diploma that I generated. And every state still allows that. There's different regulations and restrictions for sure. And a lot of those even have changed in the last 4 years, but it's possible. And if you're interested in learning more about that, that's something that many states have chapters, websites, resources you can look up, but you can also hook into our membership to find other community, that will support you and offer advice and experience around choices like this. So yes, even with a homeschool high school diploma, a child can go to college and graduate from college and go to early college. All of those things.
Well, and the other piece that I just wanted to add into this conversation is college isn't necessarily the only answer.
Absolutely not.
And I think that is being reevaluated within a lot of people's families, a lot of circles of thought, is that college doesn't hold what it was when we were growing up, when my parents were growing up. And then even some of the things that have come out as far as just deeper knowledge as to what the purpose of a university is, what the purpose of schooling is. And, is it something that is specifically desired to help propel someone forward into the future? Yeah, there's aspects of that. And there's other aspects of it that are going to be shaping you in a way that you may or may not want for your child, for yourself. So things like that to consider. That is this the path that we want to be pushing for?
And we will get into that more too in other episodes, as far as like, what is college really at this day and age? And is it something that any of us should be interested in? Yeah.
Yeah.
So thanks so much for listening, for sticking through these 3 topics with us in this sweet short little episode. But feel free to connect on Instagram or Facebook if you have thoughts, comments, questions, and we look forward to next time.
Yeah. Thank you. Hey, just wanted to jump back in and give you some information on how you can follow everything that we're doing.
Yes, we are on Substack. We are on Instagram, Facebook. We also will be launching a membership soon. Woohoo!
All right.
That's where all the fun times will be, talking with us one-on-one, talking to others who are interested in this and truly feeling really supported.
And there will be links to these things in the show notes.
Links in the show notes. We also have my website, right? My website, jaydeeazavari.org, relatively easy to find. On there, you can discover different ways to work with us individually, which would be outside of the membership, but working one-on-one with different areas of ancestral nutrition, quantum biology, homeschooling.
You work with women in health.
I work with women in health, also children. So there's a lot going on here. So yeah, check out the show notes and look for us in all the fancy places.
All right, look forward to it.